On behalf of CAP International, on behalf of APNEAP, I'm really glad to open this last plenary session of the Second World Congress Against the Sexual Exploitation of Women and Girls. I will give the floor to the members of parliament, former members of parliament, ambassadors, civil society representatives. But just before that, I'll give the floor to Ruchira Gupta, chair of APNEAP, who wanted once again to welcome you all and also to welcome the members of parliament who just joined us on stage. Thank you very much.
नमस्ते. आप सबको अपने आप विमेन वर्ल्ड वाइड की तरफ से मैं धन्यवाद देना चाहती हूँ. I want to thank you all from अपने आप Women Worldwide and also from the Coalition to Abolish Prostitution for being here, standing in solidarity and joining our journey to abolish prostitution. Thank you very much. आज हम एक बहुत ही ऐतिहासिक मौके पर मिले हैं जब हमारे सब देशों में दुनिया में आज एक ग्लोबलाइजेशन का मार्केट का बहुत बड़ा प्रहार हो रहा है और हमारे अधिकार छिने जा रहे हैं. उसमें जो सबसे मार्जिनलाइज्ड और वल्नरेबल लड़कियां हैं, जिसको हम लोग अंतिम लड़की, आखिरी लड़की, अंत कन्या, अंत्यजा कहते हैं, अंग्रेज़ी में लास्ट गर्ल, वो सबसे ज़्यादा इसमें मजबूर होती जा रही है और कमज़ोर होती जा रही है. और उसकी जो वल्नरेबिलिटी है उसको हम लोग हाईलाइट करना चाह रहे हैं इस कांग्रेस से. और आज आप लोग सब इसीलिए इतनी दूर दूर से आए हैं क्योंकि अमेरिका में भी और इंडिया में भी उस लड़की के लिए बजट्स काटे जा रहे हैं, स्कूल के लिए, शिक्षा के लिए, सुरक्षा के लिए. सो वी आर वेरी वेरी ग्रेटफुल टू द मेंबर्स ऑफ पार्लियामेंट हु हैव ऑल गैदर्ड हियर and successfully changed laws in their own countries on behalf of the last girl. So I also want to thank all of you on stage with me today and all of the survivors who have bravely shared their pain and their tears and made us realize that sex is not work, prostitution is an absence of choice, and that we want a world in which no girl or woman is bought or sold, and that can only happen when there is increased investment in the last girl, who is poor, female, and a teenager. In South Africa, she is black. In America, also she is black. In Canada, she's First Nation. In India, she's Adivasi or from a denotified criminal tribe. So on behalf of all those girls, I ask and I demand of anybody who has any influence over policy to make sure that there is increased investment in her and an end to the impunity that those who buy her and sell her enjoy, which is traffickers and sex buyers. And I want to recognize all of you in the room because I have personal relationships with all of you over this 20-year-old journey in fighting sex trafficking and prostitution, because prostitution is about inequality, and tackling inequality is political, and all of you have joined this journey. So there's Jessica Neuwirth, who was then the founder of Equality Now. There is Taina Bien Ami, who is now the director of Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. There is Nozizwe, who is the founder of Embrace Dignity. There is Malini Bhattacharya, who is the head of All India Democratic Women's Association. D. Clark, Survivors Speak. Rachel Moran, Space International. Anuradha Koirala, Maiti Nepal. Salma Ali, Bangladesh National Women's Lawyers Association. Solvodi, then I can see so many names, Namrata Sharma, Aruna Upreti, who said after this conference, I'm never going to use the term sex worker again. So our Congress has succeeded with that sentence, and I have a pledge which I will read out quickly, and then the panel starts. If I can find it, actually, because there's so much going on, I may have lost it. I think I have lost it, so I won't be able to read it out. But it's a pledge in which we just pledge that we will all from here onwards work towards creating a world in which no girl or woman is bought or sold. And by a show of hands, I would like all of you to stand with Apne Aap and the Coalition to Abolish Prostitution to take this pledge that we pledge. हम वादा करते हैं कि हम एक ऐसी दुनिया बनाएंगे जिसमें कोई लड़की या कोई औरत खरीदी या बेची नहीं जाए. We pledge that we will create a world in which no girl or woman is bought or sold. Last girl first, अब समझौता नहीं. Thank you for your show of hands.
Thank you so much, Ruchira. I will now open the panel discussion. Before that, I just wanted to raise again that CAP International is an affiliation of 19 frontline organizations, but is also an advocacy vehicle. The aim of the CAP International is to reinforce all of our members' capacities to achieve advocacy legislative reforms in their countries, and also to unite efforts to have a stronger impact at the international level, at the EU level, at the UN level, at the regional and continental level. So it's for us, of course, a unique opportunity and also a strategic objective to interact very closely with those who make the law, the parliamentarians. And we have a specific campaign that was started actually 3 years ago in Paris with 2 members of parliament who are on stage today, Catherine Coutelle from France and Gavin Shuker from the UK, who have started together a network called Parliamentarians for the Abolition of Prostitution. So we frontline NGOs, we as a coalition, we with our strategic partners from the most discriminated groups, from the trade unions, with parliamentarians, advocate for the adoption of what we call abolitionist legislations. So what is an abolitionist legislation? An abolitionist legislation is a law which includes the decriminalization of prostituted persons, so no more criminalizations of the victims, protection, support and exit options for all women, men and children affected by prostitution, a law which breaks the impunity for traffickers, pimps and sex buyers, and thus a law which criminalizes the purchase of sexual acts. Laws also that include training for professionals, prevention measures, and education for young people. So I'll stop here. I'll give the floor now to members of parliament from several countries and also to one ambassador, civil society representatives, former members of parliament, who have been working on the adoption of those laws or who are still working on the adoption of these laws. And we will start with a French member of parliament, Catherine Coutelle, who is the chair of the Women's Rights Delegation of the French National Assembly, and who was also the co-rapporteur of the French law aiming at reinforcing the fight, the struggle against the system of prostitution and reinforcing the assistance to prostituted persons. So I ask you to welcome Catherine Coutelle.
Merci. Bonjour. I'm sorry, but I prefer to speak in French, so you will have translation. Pourquoi faut-il une législation? Pourquoi faut-il des lois et que nous adoptions les lois tous ensemble? Abolitionniste, loi abolitionniste.
Why should we adopt abolitionist legislation in our countries?
Pour nous, en Europe, la prostitution a changé de forme dans les années 2000, très fortement. Il s'agit aujourd'hui très majoritairement d'un trafic mondial d'êtres humains. 95% des personnes prostituées en France et en Europe sont d'origine étrangère.
So to put things into context, there was an extreme change of the nature of prostitution in France in the year 2000, and what we see now is that 95% of prostituted persons come from outside of the French territory.
Dans notre loi, nous utilisons le terme de personnes prostituées parce que 80% sont des femmes, mais il y a aussi des jeunes hommes et des transsexuels.
In France, we prefer to use the term prostituted person simply because although 80% of those people concerned are women and girls, there are also a percentage who are boys, men and transsexuals. So when you hear the term prostituted person, that's why this afternoon.
Et notre loi s'adresse à tout le monde. Les pays pauvres qui envoient ou qui... Non, je ne sais pas qui envoie. Les personnes prostituées arrivent d'un certain nombre de pays en Europe. L'Afrique subsaharienne, Guinée, Nigeria, en Europe de l'Est, Roumanie, Bulgarie, Albanie, ou à Paris, chinoise.
So the people who are coming to the French territory as prostituted persons typically are either from Eastern Europe, so countries such as Romania and Albania, from sub-Saharan Africa and West Africa, countries like Africa. What we see in Paris is people are brought over from China.
Et depuis peu, les terroristes ont fait commerce du trafic des êtres humains, on le sait par les yézidis, mais pas seulement, qui sont arrivés par les passeurs, pris par les terroristes.
And more recently, we've seen the traffic of human beings perpetrated by terrorists such as ISIS, referred to in France as Daesh. In particular, we've heard these last few days of the Yazidi peoples, but they are not the only ones who have been trafficked in this manner for reasons of raising finances.
Ce qui a changé depuis les années 2000, c'est que cette prostitution est très visible sur les trottoirs de nos rues.
What we've seen since the year 2000 is that prostitution has become very visible on the streets and pavements of France.
Et la population se demande pourquoi les gouvernements n'agissent pas.
And the French population has begun to put the question, why is the government not doing anything?
Face à cette situation, il nous a fallu 5 ans pour arriver à avoir notre loi.
Confronted with this situation, it took us 5 years to generate and legislate our new law.
Depuis le premier rapport qui faisait l'état des lieux de la prostitution en France, jusqu'à l'adoption de la loi le 13 avril 2016.
So from the first moment that absolutely congratulations, from the first moment that research was conducted into the state of prostitution in France to the adoption of the new French law on the 13th of April 2016.
Je vous passe les étapes pour vous dire à quoi nous sommes arrivés.
I explain this to you just to give some context as to the work that we put in to generate this legislation.
4 volets dans notre loi. Renforcer la lutte contre les proxénètes et les trafics des êtres humains, y compris sur Internet.
So there are 4 particular aspects to this law. The first being to combat... Expliquez-moi encore. Le premier volet.
Premier volet, c'est le trafic des êtres humains,
Okay,
contre le proxénétisme et le trafic des êtres humains.
Thank you. To combat human trafficking and pimping of human persons.
Y compris sur Internet.
Including via Internet.
Le deuxième volet, pour nous le plus important, on a organisé un parcours de sortie de la prostitution.
The second aspect, which is of particular importance to us, was to enforce exit opportunities for people in prostitution should they wish to come out.
Avec pour les personnes qui sortent de la prostitution, une aide financière, un titre de séjour, si elles sont étrangères, un titre de séjour et un accompagnement vers les logements et le travail.
And in particular for people choosing to come out of prostitution, financial assistance to help them with that, papers should they be undocumented, and assistance in gaining housing.
Avec un fonds dédié à la sortie de prostitution.
With funds specifically dedicated to exit strategies for people in prostitution.
Et ce fonds sera alimenté par les biens pris au mal acquis, par les biens mal acquis, par les proxénètes qui auront été arrêtés. Quand on aura piqué leur argent, ils iront alimenter ce fonds.
These funds are partially fed by the money that has been acquired illegally by the pimps and the traffickers.
C'est l'argent qui revient aux prostituées. Troisième volet, former tous les acteurs. Vous l'avez dit les unes et les autres dans vos témoignages, lorsque vous allez à la police, lorsque vous êtes devant des juges, lorsqu'il y a des travailleurs sociaux, s'ils ne comprennent pas ce que vous avez vécu, vous avez un mauvais traitement.
The third aspect of the law was to create training for all those actors working in the social services and law enforcement sectors of society. And we've heard over the last few days of the negative responses that some of you have received in approaching those actors. So now hopefully that will be different because of this training.
Cette formation comprend aussi l'éducation des jeunes à l'école, à l'égalité entre les filles et les garçons et au respect.
The training also includes specific gender equality education for boys and girls in school.
Et l'égalité et à la dignité.
Equality and the dignity of the human person.
Respect. Et enfin, on inverse la culpabilité. Les personnes prostituées ne sont plus coupables. Elles sont des victimes, victimes de violences, victimes de traite, et c'est le client qui est coupable, parce qu'il alimente un commerce. S'il y a de la demande, il y a du commerce.
And the final aspect of the law was to reverse liability for the act of prostitution. So prostituted people are no longer considered liable for selling sex, but sex buyers are now considered responsible and held liable.
Notre idée, assécher le commerce, poursuivre le client. Il a une amende, 1 500 € la première fois, et un stage s'il récidive. On double l'amende et il a un stage à suivre sur la réalité de la prostitution.
So at the outset, if someone is found to be guilty of trying to buy sex, they are fined to the amount of 1,500 euros. I'm afraid I can't do the maths for what that means in rupees, but it's a substantial sum. If they're found to reoffend, they're sent for specific training, and the fine is doubled.
Depuis que la loi est passée, en région parisienne, il y a eu 150 clients de verbalisés.
Since the passage of the law, just in the Parisian region, there have been 500 clients, sex buyers, who have been caught by the police for the new.
Verbalisés.
Yeah, they've been fined by the police.
Ça paraît peut-être peu, mais pour la police, c'est beaucoup. Hein. C'est pas facile à faire.
It may not seem like a lot, but for the police, it feels enormous, and it's a real step change in approaching clients.
Alors pourquoi nous y sommes arrivés ? D'abord, il faut une volonté politique. Nous l'avions avec le gouvernement et nous avons fait cette loi avec l'opposition. Nous avions un consensus, ce qui en France est très rare.
So how did we arrive at this legislation? Firstly, we worked very closely with the government, and secondly, we achieved a consensus, which, as you may know in French politics, is extremely rare.
Mais je veux insister ici, le lobby des associations a été fondamental. Je ne le dis pas parce que je suis à Cap International, mais j'y crois fondamentalement. Mouvement d'Unis, Fondation Cell, Rosen qui est venue à l'Assemblée dire son parcours de survivante.
But I would like to emphasize that the lobbying achieved by the various different associations and organizations to achieve this law was absolutely essential. So there was made mention of the Mouvement d'Unis, which is represented strongly here today, Cap International, of course, Fondation Cell, and the tremendous work of Rosen, who's in the audience, who brought her story across France to help persuade people.
Parce que ce type de loi ne passe pas sans des argumentaires très solides, des chiffres, des statistiques, des études médicales, des études de santé, des études, des témoignages, des travaux de chercheurs, y compris, et je tiens à saluer le travail de Claudine Le Gardinier, qui nous a rendu service en ayant fait parler les clients et la violence que pratiquent et reconnaissent les clients contre les prostituées.
It's important to recognize that this type of legislation doesn't come about without qualitative and quantitative data. So much reliance was placed on figures, on statistics, on research done on the health and medical well-being of prostituted persons. There was also made mention of Claudine Le Gardinier, who's in the audience, who brought to light many important aspects that help persuade people of the necessity of the law.
Mais aussi, on s'est appuyé sur l'existant et sur la loi suédoise, qui nous a... On est allé en Suède voir les Suédois. Ils avaient 10 ans de loi et ils en avaient fait une évaluation. Donc, on pouvait apporter un exemple concret d'une loi qui marchait.
Of huge assistance to us also was the fact that Sweden had already enacted a similar piece of legislation 10 years ago, and that enabled us to rely on the data that has been gathered since that legislation and also to demonstrate the value of the legislation. So we looked to Sweden, we visited Sweden, and that was very helpful in our fight to bring this legislation to France.
Parce qu'il ne faut pas minimiser les difficultés, je le dis pour ceux et celles qui se lancent dans l'aventure.
It's important not to minimize the difficulties of those who wish to participate in this kind of legislative adventure.
Les idées fausses sont nombreuses sur la prostitution. La méconnaissance, pour tout le monde, c'est le plus vieux métier du monde, donc on n'y peut rien.
There are many traps to fall into. The most cliched one is the fact that prostitution is the oldest profession in the world. It's an argument that's repeated time and time again, and it's one that has to be combated.
Il y aurait des côtés chatoyants à la prostitution. En France, ça s'appelait les maisons closes, les escort girls. On pense que c'est une prostitution très enjolivée, très agréable.
There's the idea that prostitution, there's a certain type of prostitution in France which was very agreeable, that involved...
Chatoyante.
Oui, chatoyante.
Glamour.
Glamorous, thank you. So escort girls,
Escort girl.
The type of prostitution that's not seen necessarily on the street, but that people are drawn to through films like and other such cultural clichés.
Je ne sais si vous avez entendu parler de l'affaire de DSK, du Fonds monétaire international, mais son procès avec des escort girls qui ont témoigné de la dureté de leur vie, de la violence de leur vie, nous a rendu service en pleine discussion à l'Assemblée.
I don't know if you heard at the time of the legal suit that was brought against Dominique Strauss-Kahn for his affair with escort girls. He at the time was the head of the IMF, and the affair was much discussed in Parliament and became part of our fight against prostitution.
Parce que si on a des associations avec nous, on a des lobbies contre nous, très puissants. Les travailleurs du sexe.
Much as we have many associations who work with us, there were also lobbyists who are working very much against us, including those who call themselves sex workers.
Toujours représentés par des hommes.
Inevitably always represented by men.
Des médias.
The media.
Très peu compréhensifs pour nous au début.
Very difficult for us to understand at the start why the media was so against us.
Des arguments tels qu'il y a un besoin irrépressible des hommes. Si vous enlevez la prostitution, vous augmenterez le viol.
The inevitable argument that there are irrepressible needs of men that must be served by prostitution, otherwise rape incidences will increase.
Je croyais que l'éducation, c'était ne pas répondre à toutes ces impulsions, mais je dois me tromper sur le sens d'éducation.
There was mention of the need for education to undermine these types of argument, but education is a difficult word to use in this context.
Et aussi, il a fallu convaincre nos collègues députés un par un.
And finally, it was necessary for us to convince our fellow parliamentarians one by one.
J'ai le temps de dire où on en est maintenant, en quelques mots, très rapidement. Aujourd'hui, on en est des clients verbalisés, un dispositif d'installation qui se met en place seulement maintenant avec la formation des acteurs et un fonds de 20 millions d'euros qui pourra être abondé.
Okay, so where are we today? We have funds of 20 million?
20 millions d'euros.
Wow. 20 million euros to put towards the
2
work.
millions cette année. Pardon, excusez-moi.
2 million.
20 millions, c'est à la fin. 20 millions, c'est à la fin, excusez. Voilà. 4 millions cette année, on a doublé. 4 millions cette année, 20 millions, c'est à la fin.
Okay, so we're aiming towards 20 million, but right now we have 4 million to put towards the funds. We have an advancement of the various different aspects of the law and...
La mise en place des associations.
Oui, and the installation of various organizations to help carry out the aspects of the law.
Je termine comme député en juin 2017 et jusque-là, je me battrai pour que la loi soit appliquée. Merci à vous.
Thank you very much. I will work till the end of my parliamentary career to make sure that this happens properly.
Thank you very much. We will now give the floor to Gavin Shuker, who is a member of Parliament from the UK, the House of Commons, and who is also the chair of the all-party working groups on prostitution.
Thank you so much. My French is awful, so I promise to speak in English. I apologise to those who can't follow my English. Absolutely right. I'm Gavin Shuker. I've been a member of Parliament in the UK House of Commons for 7 years, and for 6 of those I've chaired the all-party group on prostitution. And I suppose my insight that I'd want to offer today is to try and think about a situation in the UK where, frankly, we've been less successful than we have been in France, and some of the lessons that we've learnt through that process. Why is it that politicians are so reluctant to get involved in changing the law about prostitution? Well, I'm a politician, so let me tell you a few reasons that I've heard and why I think it's the case. First of all, you hear the argument there's no votes in it. I know that sounds really awful and really cynical, but I suppose we're trying to think about how we bring about active change. And do you know what? Maybe there is an argument that backs that up. People feel very reluctant. The lack of knowledge about prostitution is very high in the community. And what it gives politicians is a get-out. It gives them an opportunity to say, I'm sure that some prostitution is highly exploitative. But on the other hand, I've seen lots of, well, not lots of films, maybe lots of films. I've seen lots of portrayals of people for whom it seems to be about choice and voice and control. And therefore, I've got one picture and another picture, and I never have to make a judgment about the balance of harm between these two, and therefore I never need to do anything about it. That's a common issue you come up against when you look to try and change the law. You've got to convince parliamentarians that the evidence is out there, that you can look with your own eyes. You can make a judgment about whether or not you believe the trade to be inherently exploitative, as I do, and as I'm sure people in this room do as well. And of course, lastly, we're all hypocrites. In the UK, around about 1 in 10 men have purchased sex, we know. I have no reason to doubt that in the UK Parliament, 1 in 10 men at least have purchased sex at some point in their lives. And therefore, people are really reluctant to go near it or have a vested interest about it. But we have to engage on those issues with parliamentarians. I'm so grateful for CAP and the work that they have done to make sure that we are now working together on an international level. And just to say, you know, the parliamentarians that we meet with regularly to try and encourage one another and do this work need that encouragement, because in many cases we are one of a handful of lone voices within our own parliaments trying to move this forward. We need to convince politicians in particular of, in my opinion, 3 things that are the basis for any kind of change in the law. The first one is common sense, right? There is not an oversupply of women who are desperate to grow up to go into prostitution. There is an oversupply of men who think it is their human right to be able to purchase, right? And until you make that point and make it clear to people, the light doesn't come on. For some reason, they think that people want to, jump out and mug the perfectly nice, friendly, family man image of a man that wants to purchase sex, when the reality of their own experience, when they just think about it for a moment, realise that's the case. Secondly, that women cannot be accomplices to their own exploitation. They cannot be. So any kind of criminal justice system that causes women involved in prostitution, I appreciate, by the way, that I'm talking in a highly genderised way, but prostitution, frankly, is highly genderised. It is a gender issue amongst many others. The realisation that women should be diverted from the criminal justice system, that they cannot be accomplices to their own exploitation. And thirdly, that social attitudes can and do change. They do regularly with all sorts of issues. This argument that it's the oldest profession is such an easy one to hide behind. And by the way, they said about slavery as well. That's the point. That's the point. These things should and must change. And thankfully, because of the examples of a number of countries with brave political leaders who have got the law changed, we're able to look at the evidence and to say that social attitudes do change over time, and therefore a legitimate aim of public policy is to try and seek to reduce the size and scale of sexual exploitation through prostitution and to eradicate it. Because we, frankly, cannot say that we live in a world where men and women are equal, but where women are purchased by men. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. So, in the UK, let me give you an update of what the picture looks like. In 2013, I began a piece of work that looked at why the laws that are already there, that ostensibly are to protect women in particular involved in prostitution from violence and exploitation, are not being used and are ineffectual. And what I discovered was, by talking to the police, to the Home Office, to people that work on the front line, and to women that are involved in selling sex themselves. It comes down to the fact that ultimately we have not made a judgment as the people that are charged with making these judgments, politicians, parliaments. We've not made a judgment about the nature of prostitution. And so we took a judgment in our country that instead of trying to do kind of little piecemeal bits here and there, try and use the law that we've got, we would lay out in really clear and simple terms what we considered to be the best legal settlement for dealing with the issue of prostitution. And so we wrote a report. It was called Shifting the Burden. It looked at the evidence that actually people would agree on. And we discovered, for example, that our own government, who are reluctant to do anything about this issue, by the way, concluded that something like 70% of the women working on the streets in the UK had experience of being looked after or been in the care system, been in care homes. Obviously came from very difficult and troubled backgrounds in some cases as well. But also, most shockingly of all, perhaps for me, that over half of those people who were active in prostitution had started below the age at which they could consent. Now, consent is a difficult issue when we're talking about prostitution, right? But I think most people would agree that if you are a child when you enter into prostitution, on your 18th birthday, you don't suddenly start choosing it. But yet that's the legal settlement that we have. That's the law that we do. In our own country, in the United Kingdom, like many countries, we've had to face up to the scale of child sexual exploitation through a number of very high-profile cases. And yet, the irony of it is that the biggest driver for child sexual exploitation in our country is not a celebrity, it's not what potentially goes on in these very high-profile cases. It is prostitution. And yet people are reluctant to make the link. Why? Because if they did, they would have to act on it. So today, we have 3 different legal settlements in the United Kingdom, and this is perhaps where I have a little bit of hope about where the debate may go. One in Northern Ireland, where they have adopted a model which is very similar to the Nordic model, where the purchase of sex is criminalised, and we're working on the other aspects as well. In Scotland, where that government views prostitution to be inherently exploitative and a form of violence against women and girls, amen to that. And in England, where actually the legal settlement is pretty messy, covers about 5 different acts of parliament over about 60 years, and frankly is very ineffectual. And we have a rapporteur, someone that takes responsibility for looking at human trafficking. My hope is that we may be able to nudge him to look at those 3 different settlements and make a judgment about what works best to protect women in prostitution in particular. I'll just finish with this because there's so many people that would speak and there's so much wisdom on this panel. Coming back to my first point, you know, this is an incredibly inherently human process, the way in which things change. People often look at kind of our political systems and they assume that everything is so detached, that there's some grand conspiracy that locks people out. Actually, when you get inside a parliament, you realise it comes down to individual relationships. It comes down to drawing people over, walking them through the arguments, seeing it come through. Of course, the converse is true as well. Last year, we had a report by the Home Affairs Committee. That Home Affairs Committee looked at prostitution, and many NGOs and parliamentarians were really positive about that, because we believed that they would be able to look and take an even-handed approach to the evidence, which overwhelmingly, by the way, in terms of the most compelling witnesses, was that, just as we believe, prostitution is inherently exploitative, a form of violence against women, that it's incompatible with a gender equal world. And yet, the chair of that Home Affairs Select Committee went off and wrote a report. It was approved in a meeting with only 2 other members there present. And it basically said, well, you know, we're not going to make any judgment about it, but we find the evidence that prostitution is just fine is very compelling. Now, that's obviously hugely difficult for us in the UK. But 2 months later, the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee was forced to resign his job as chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. Does anyone guess where this is going? Yes. Exactly, because of allegations that he had spoken about his use of prostitutes. Now, this is the reality of what we're dealing with. And so I think, where do I get hope from? I get hope from the encouragement of other parliamentarians. I get hope from the fact that if it is that inherently a human process, then it's also a shapeable process. That people exercising their voices can make a difference. That we need more parliamentarians, not fewer parliamentarians, that think this is an issue worthy of the importance with which we all do here today. I always say this, I have absolutely no doubt, and this is completely true, I have absolutely no doubt that eventually in our country we will become as progressive, just, equitable as other countries that have adopted the Nordic model. I have no doubt at all that we will get there. I don't know whether it's going to be 3 years or 25 years, but the strength of the argument is with us on this issue. The other arguments fall away. And so we need to be persistent in making them because we're called, many of us, to do these kind of in season and out. And that's the task. NGOs, parliamentarians working together to get this job done and to make sure that there is no country in the world in which a woman or a girl can be bought, exploited or subject to violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gavin Shuker, on behalf of CAP International and all of us here. Thank you so much for your support and commitment. We will now give the floor to Nafisa Shah, who is a member of parliament from Pakistan, the former vice chair of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, and former secretary of the Women's Parliamentary Caucus. Thank you so much for joining us from Pakistan. Much welcome.
Thank you very much, distinguished panel, distinguished delegates, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm very, very delighted to be here and to be what I see to be a movement of sorts, comprising of lawyers, academics, parliamentarians, NGOs, and gathered here together in its resolve to end sexual exploitation of women and girls. And I want to thank Apne Aap and the CAP teams who must be applauded for this very, very brave and courageous accomplishment. After listening to the testimonies yesterday, I must say I was very moved. These were both intense and powerful. They were personal histories, but they were very political. And I am very motivated and committed to go back to my country and lead and advocate this important cause. In the parliament, I've been in the parliament for 8 years. And in the last, I'm an opposition member now. But in the last tenure, I had the opportunity to serve as a secretary for an all-parties women group. This women group was constituted by women parliamentarians, and it was a very conscious effort to resolve that on issues of gender, on issues of rights, we will not be divisive, or we will not let ourselves be divided. And this helped us do some important legislations in Pakistan, which were milestones. We were able to set up a powerful women's commission. Because of this, we were able to set up a law against sexual harassment. All this despite, in Pakistan, the challenge of the religious right, which is there as it's a minority, but it's a very powerful presence in the parliament and outside the parliament, and that needed a lot of negotiating. So I'm here today not only to share my own parliament's contribution in this effort, but also to take back the resources that this conference creates in terms of a collective vision, ideas, and new approaches, and prepare joint strategies that may help us in combating sexual exploitation against women and girls. Pakistan poses a lot of challenges. Post-Zia, we had a very long dictatorship in which the country witnessed Islamization of law. I don't know whatever that means. But what it did was that it was all done on the body, the movement, the expression of women. It was centered on what women are, should be in the society. This was in the 80s. We're still recovering from that Islamization phase. But what it did was, in terms of the issue of trafficking and prostitution, what it did was that previously we had the prostituted persons in identifiable, concrete, recognizable ghettos and spaces where they could be regulated or so on. But what it did this post-Zia is that this was discussed by my colleague yesterday, was that it made this whole issue more diffuse. And so presently Pakistan is faced with multiple challenges in dealing with this issue, because this issue is interspersed, or let's say the trafficking issue is mediated by social, cultural, and economic relations. So there are issues of child labor, which have to be addressed in order to address the issue of trafficking. Even something as safe as marriage and family, which are considered sacred institutions in Pakistan, and the state and the law, and these are something that we never problematize. We say, so far as everything is in the context of the family and the marriage, all is okay. But it is within these spaces that, in my experience, there's so much of prostitution and trafficking takes place. So how do we even begin to look at this issue? The latest approach of considering the demand factor in policy making is important. But this demand is not just driven by markets of drugs, trafficking, sexual desire, perversion of individuals, but also of ideologies, power, and politics. For example, again, is something that my country and South Asia is facing, and a large part of the Middle East. Wars create demands as well, as does militancy and terrorism. And this is something that, I would invite all of us to look at in more detail. And women and girls are exploited not only by men seeking sex, but also by soldiers, police, militants, and handlers. Alongside demand, equally important are supply-side issues, including poverty, rural underdevelopment, illiteracy, marginalization, and ghettoization of communities and ethnicities by the state parties. I want to just give some examples of my own experience with the last girls, and these are very recent cases, just to also demonstrate how complex the issue can get for a legislator to think through these things. So, for instance, a few days before I was coming to this conference, we saw a last girl in a stream of dirty gutter water in Pakistan, in Karachi, and her throat was slit and she was raped multiple times. So this is one image that the country saw recently. Miraculously, she was rescued and her life was saved, and the child is recovering and the culprits have been arrested. Now, I also want to say that very often in my country, which is going through war and terrorism, the last girl is very often a boy. There are so many, and in my own constituency, I've had to deal every 2 or 3 years. I go through this case of a child killed after being raped. And some of this is related to the whole issue of how the religious schools were used in Pakistan for promotion of militarism, militancy, and jihadism. This is particularly in the 80s, where a lot of dollar aid, a lot of petrodollars were pumped into these so-called religious schools, where a militant ideology was ingrained. And today's suicide bombers, many of them come through that particular ideological grounding, where these children are exploited sexually, they are drugged and today's suicide bombers, if you see their narratives, it will go back to all this. So many times we have to face with last girls being actually boys. A recent study from Sahil, which is a non-government organization working against child sexual abuse, reported that the total number of young boys being abused increased by 4.3% in the first half of 2015, which was when this report was published. And that actually reversed the ratio of the last girl. The report said that 170 boys aged 6 to 10 were abused compared to 150 girls of the same ages. Again, another image of the last girls and boys. Again, a very recent incident. And this is something that even shook the parliament. We legislated afterwards on this issue. But in a small village near the city of Kusur, a shocking incident of 200 to 300 children being used for manufacturing of porn material for the Western markets. Used in the rural communities, both girls and boys were used, and this sort of racket was unearthed, and this was so expansive and so big. They seized more than 400 videos. Some of these videos were selling for as much as 50 rupees within the local community. And this abuse was going on for several years. And actually these kids and their parents were being blackmailed by the racketeers. So all these actually show that Islam, strict conservatism notwithstanding, children, teenagers, women face abuse, violence, and trafficking. The other thing that complicates issue is, again, as I said, the social institution of family and marriage. In my own area, I'm dealing with a case of a father who has forced 2 of his daughters into serial marriages in return for money. The father marries the girls, forces them to divorce, and then remarry. And the youngest of these daughters, 2 of them had already gone through these so-called, marriages for several times. When the youngest girl came to me, and I'm trying to assist the entire family, and at least she was saved from being prostituted through marriage. Again, the issue of domestic labor, another last girl, again a very recent case. She was trafficked by her own parents, sold into slavery, and they landed up in a judge's house, and the judge's wife then tortured her, and she was discovered by the courts. That case is still being heard by the Chief Justice of Pakistan. So these are all interrelated, and these issues just, I'm just trying to draw in all the connections that as I said, the social, cultural, and economic relations that mediate trafficking, and how do we address them? Do we address them singly? Do we address them generally? Now, coming to legislation, Pakistan has, has signed on all the international conventions and protocols on child labor, on human rights, and of course the rights of the child. Pakistani law, the constitution, it provides for for promotion of social justice and eradication of social evils in Article 37, stating that it shall prevent prostitution, gambling, and taking of injurious drugs, printing, publication, circulation, and display of obscene literature and advertisements. Similarly, in Article 11, it prohibits slavery and forced labor. And a number of laws have been instituted. There is no comprehensive law on prostitution itself, but it is covered under the Zina Ordinance. This is something that General Ziaul Haq did. But now, in 2006, many of the provisions of prostitution or criminalizing prostitutions of persons has come under a protection of women law. And here, the selling or buying of sex is criminalized, and it's a very stringent punishment. It's about 25 years. Then there is another law which is quoted and looked at internationally, oft quoted, that's called the Prevention and Control of Human Trafficking Ordinance, which was passed in 2002. Again, this is something where trafficking and, there's a standard definition of trafficking. The punishment ranges from 7 to 14 years. Then there is a law on abolition of bonded labor. There are prohibition of child marriage laws. I won't go into that. And then there's a plethora of child protection laws. And it's easy to see why we have chosen the the root of child protection, a lot of this covers prostitution and bonded labor, and a lot of these. Why we chose child protection laws is because it's probably a conceptual form that our contests between religion and rights are most easily reconciled. This is something that all provinces have done. And again, it provides for institutional forms through which children can be protected. It allows for setting up of child protection units, child commissions, and so on. Now, finally, just to conclude, I'll talk about what the problems with all these multiple laws are, and then I will take my place. For a clear legal framework to emerge, there are a number of issues that need to be addressed. The biggest problem with Pakistani law is a very basic one. What is the age that defines a child? We have not really sorted it out. In every law, the age is different. In every province, the age is different. In my province, in Sindh, the age for the marriageable age at which a person becomes an adult and can marry is 18, both for girls and boys. So my province is a step ahead of others. But the Pakistani law discriminates. There's a separate age for girls, which is 16, and a separate age for boys, which is 18. But for bonded labor, for issues of labor, child labor, for issues of criminal liability, the ages are 14 for children. So there are a lot of different ages that we have to deal with. And all this, of course, makes children vulnerable. We recently wanted to come up in the Pakistani Parliament on making this uniform. So bringing 18 as the magic number, which should be the minimum age for marriage for children. But you know what? We were faced with a big backlash. There is an institution in Pakistan which is called the Islamic Ideology Council, and you have a cleric heading that, and he actually resisted this move, and he came up with a statement, although it's only a recommendatory body. But he came up with a statement, and he said, which was something that shocked all of us, and we asked for disbanding of this organization. He said that if a girl shows signs of puberty at 9, that is, the age at which she should marry. So the puberty, this whole thing of the nature, the puberty should be defining the age of the girl. And that is something that we, in fact, this cleric again came up with another statement recently, which says that, in Islam, it's all right to give a slight beating to a wife. So we've had to the Pakistani Parliament has to deal with the religious right, which unfortunately has even been mainstreamed in some of our institutions. But fortunately, what it did was that we all started, actively lobbying to disband the Islamic Ideology Council. We haven't succeeded yet. But this is some of the challenges that we had to deal with. So this is a biggest challenge with us in terms of definition of what constitutes a child or what constitutes an adult and what happens when. The second problem with the laws are all the overlaps and the confusions between the multitude of laws on child trafficking, prostitution, pornography, bonded labor, child protection, and streamline them. So you have different punishments for the same violation in different laws, and I think that we need reading. The main law, again, which is the Prevention and Control of Human Trafficking Ordinance, is a very limiting law. It's a very short thing. It basically what it did is it actually defined for the first time what constituted trafficking, and it criminalized it. And it also, luckily, it also did not allow the parents to get away with it. So the criminal liability was also there for the parents if they were involved in prostituting or trafficking their children. But it still remains a very let's say this is a law that really has a lot of shortcomings and requires a lot of change. It excludes, it only concerns trafficking internationally, border to border. It does not deal with trafficking internally, although there are laws which cover trafficking internally, but those are others. Then it also excludes forced marriages, that limiting its scopes. It's also silent on punishments should death occur as a result of human trafficking. And then also all the latest a position that all of us have taken today on decriminalization of prostituted persons is something that this law needs reform there to be able to include that. It doesn't have any exit routes, no provisions for rehabilitation. Finally, our institutional mechanisms remain weak. The problems remain with the implementation of legislation and, of course, as I said, the cultural practices, including the sacred status given to marriage and family, has prevented the state to act against these institutions and to criminalize anything that happens in the space of the home, including domestic violence legislation. So thank you very much, and I hope that I take a lot from, I will take a lot from this meeting, and I hope to learn all the different progress that is being made in different countries on this issue, and I will take forward our incomplete legislations and try and improve on them. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nafisa Shah. We are very glad to identify a new ally in Pakistan, and we will keep in touch with you. I would like now to introduce Mary Honeyball, who is a member of the European Parliament and who was the first rapporteur in the European Parliament on sexual exploitation, trafficking in human beings, and prostitution. And she's the author of the Honeyball resolution.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for this invitation to come and talk to you, and thank you to CAP and APNEAP for organising it. And it's brilliant to see so many of you here with an interest and a real energy about all of you to do something about prostitution. And that's why I'm filled with hope about this. As Gavin has already said, things aren't very good in the United Kingdom, and although I'm an MEP, I represent London and I'm in the UK, and it's not very good on a lot of levels, and we have lost a lot of the momentum about prostitution and dealing with it. But I also believe we can get it back, and we haven't, to such an extent, lost that momentum in the European Parliament. And certainly as long as I'm there, I will keep going, and the Women's Committee will keep going, campaigning on this. And I would like to go back to what Rachura Gupta said, and has said a few times during this session, and that is that sex is not work. And I think we just need to hang on to that. Sex is not work. And when you come across people who talk about sex workers, we really have to challenge this. And I've also had a lot of this put to me in various media interviews and just in general conversation with people, and in dealing with people from the other side of the argument, who are from the various organisations called the English Collection of Prostitutes, the International Union of Sex Workers. I had a lot to do with them over the years. They seem to comprise about 6 people. Honestly, I have seen the same 6 people all over the UK and all over Europe. But I think there's a very telling way of dealing with those questions, because all you have to do is to ask someone who puts that to you, that sex work is work like anything else. Ask them how they would feel if their sister, their daughter, their niece, their best friend, someone close to them, a woman close to them, was a prostituted woman, was acting as a prostitute, who was earning her living by doing that. Nobody is going to tell you that they want that person that they're close to do that. And that really is what we're talking about. We are talking here about exploitation, about using women's bodies, and we're talking also about equality. We've mentioned that a lot, but this is fundamentally about equality between women and men. And as long as we have prostitution within our society, in all countries across the world, as long as we have it, we will never achieve true equality between men and women. And that's why what you're doing is just so very, very important. It's a very important piece in a very big question. And that's why I think we all must continue the work we're doing, continue with the energy that we have to go on with this campaign and with this fight. And I do believe eventually, and like Gavin does eventually, and I think it is still quite an eventually, but I think we will get there. One of the reasons I got involved in the prostitution question, other than the fact that I am a feminist, I'm on the Women's Committee of the European Parliament, and I've been involved in women's campaigns for a very, very long time now. One of the reasons I specifically got involved in the prostitution question is that I represent London, and London is very much a destination for human trafficking. And the whole issue of trafficking, human trafficking and prostitution are totally linked because trafficking feeds prostitution. I've got some figures here from the EU. 80% of the victims of human trafficking, those who are trafficked, are female. And 69%, nearly 70% of them end up in prostitution of one form or another. So trafficking is very much about women and girls. Sadly, a lot of them are girls, really quite young girls. And it is about women, and that's why I think we here need to get involved with the trafficking side of this, as well as what happens within our own countries regarding prostitution. Because prostitution, certainly in Europe, feeds prostitution. And if we can deal with trafficking, we will go some way towards dealing with, not the total way, but quite a long way towards dealing with the whole issue of prostitution. And the European Union, one of the very good things that the European Union has done is that we introduced in 2011 a directive against trafficking. And we appointed at that time an individual who is the coordinator for anti-trafficking across the EU. So we have a real infrastructure there to combat trafficking. We could do with more resources, obviously, but there is something in place. And the anti-trafficking coordinator, who is a woman from Cyprus, actually, called Maria Vasiliadou, has done an amazing job. And really raised the profile and really got everybody thinking about trafficking and about the consequences of it. And about the scale, because I think there's a bit of a tendency sometimes to think about trafficking, it's something which happens on and off, and it's not really that huge. Trafficking is massive organised crime. In fact, it's second only to the drugs industry in the revenue it generates for criminal gangs. So it's huge, huge criminal business, and therefore really does need that kind of response. And I don't think we're there yet, and I think that has to be part of our campaign, that we do really start talking about trafficking and for the activity that it really is and just how utterly and totally appalling it is. And of course the result of that is that the majority, and we've talked about this earlier in the day, the majority of those these days, certainly in most of Europe and certainly in the UK, who are prostituted women and girls, do come from other countries. They are people who come, obviously illegally. They are trafficked, and they work, it's not work, they are exploited in other countries with absolutely no means of getting out of it. When you land, I mean, say someone comes from another country to the UK, to London, if they have no papers, they have no identification, they are put in a brothel somewhere, they don't speak the language, they are never going to get out of that without assistance, which is why one of the things which I think is so important and we really need to do more of, and I know Sweden is good on this, is helping women to exit prostitution. And that has to be part of any strategy, that because unless we do that, trafficking is going to continue, and we're going to continue to have very, very badly exploited women hidden away with nobody knowing anything about them. So that was my own personal journey into the whole question of prostitution, because living and representing London, it is very important and something which we need to, not only in London, across the UK and across Europe, really deal with. We really need to cut back on trafficking as quickly and as much as we possibly can. So that's essentially where all that's going. And I think what we ought to do too, before I start telling you about my report, there's a lot of myths that go around about legalising prostitution, which need to be challenged, because in terms of trafficking, proportionately more women and girls are trafficked into countries where prostitution is legal. Prostitution in Europe is completely legal in Holland and in Germany, and they have, proportionate to their populations, the highest levels of human trafficking anywhere in Europe. And when you think about it, it's pretty obvious why that happens, because if prostitution is legal, there is an increased demand for it, so there is going to have to be women there to meet that demand, and so they are trafficked. And it's really a very vicious circle, and the whole question of trafficking is so fundamental to all of this which is going on. And I talk about this at some length because I was here for all of the day, and we've talked a lot, rightly, about prostitution and equality and exploitation, but human trafficking is such a vital part of that. We have to take that into account and deal with that as part of anything that we do when we're talking about prostitution. And the message of this is that if you legalise prostitution, it just increases human trafficking. And there is therefore no such thing as regulating prostitution. There's no such thing as safe prostitution. It just simply doesn't exist. All it does, if you try and do that, you legalise prostitution, you increase trafficking, and also it is completely against any form of equality between men and women. Well, my report, which other speakers have very kindly mentioned, was passed by the European Parliament in February 2014. I was the rapporteur. It was a report which came from the Women's Rights Committee, and I was the rapporteur. It's not legislative, and I will talk more about why not later, because there are various forms of legislative frameworks across the EU for prostitution. So it wasn't possible at this stage in the process to put forward legislation at EU level. Also, most aspects of prostitution, such as how you do it, how it's regulated, and the laws concerning prostitution and the laws concerning policing and law and order are all done at national level. So I don't think we will ever see something across the whole of Europe which will be legislation. But my report was an own initiative report which became and still is a resolution of the European Parliament. And I know it's been taken up very seriously in very many EU member states, and France, which is completely brilliant, France actually passed the Nordic model into their law. I mean, I think France has done it very, very well and are to be congratulated. And that's essentially what my report was about. It was saying that the EU adopts the idea of the Nordic model, which now in France and in Sweden and in other countries which were mentioned, as the way that we want this particular debate and the whole question of prostitution to go. In other words, it is that the buyer of sexual services is criminalised and the exploited, prostituted women and girls are not criminalised. That's basically what the report says. And that is now, and it still is, the policy and the resolution of the European Parliament. However, it is, as I said, a difficult issue to deal with across the whole of Europe because laws on prostitution vary enormously. In the UK, as Gavin hinted, the whole thing is very confused. actually being a prostitute as such is not illegal, but anything around it is a criminal offence, such as soliciting, running a brothel, which makes the whole question slightly difficult. As I said before, in Holland and Germany, prostitution is completely legal, though a ray of hope here. I understand from various conversations with colleagues that both of those countries are looking at this and are unhappy about the way that things have turned out, because they are seeing an increase in human trafficking, they're seeing an increase in prostitution, and they don't feel that this really is very good for their societies. And I remember some while ago seeing a clip of a film about one of the mega brothels in Germany, and it was, I just found the whole thing very shocking, actually, that women were being treated in this way and were being there for sale, and men were sort of wandering in, and it was all treated as it was just a normal part of life. Well, it isn't. There is nothing about prostitution which is a normal part of life. It is not how we should be aspiring to live. And I do think that Germany is perhaps now understanding that they really need to deal with this. And there have been, I know there are members of the German Parliament who are working on these issues. And other countries have similar sorts of setups to the UK, where it's actually the woman herself or the prostitution itself which is the offence. And in countries where that's the case, it's really the whole principles of the law backwards, because what that does is make the victim the one who is deemed to have committed the offence, which is just so completely wrong when you think about it. It really does need changing. So that was my report, was so that and which was agreed. It was agreed, incidentally, for those who like these things, it was agreed for 343 votes against 139 with 105 abstentions. So it was a substantial majority of the European Parliament which passed that. So there is really quite a mandate there, and I think that's something we can build on as well. So we have a way to go, and I think the other thing that we do need to really think hard about is exiting prostitution and how we deal with that, because we need to be very, very clear that it's prostitution that we are against, not the prostituted women and girls, and we need to just keep saying that. And one of the other things that my report looked at and said we should do is find ways of helping women exit prostitution, because there is data which says that the overwhelming majority of women and girls in prostitution want to leave. There's this sort of myth out there that a lot of women enjoy this and they choose to do it. I mean, it's just not true. The overwhelming majority of women would leave if they had the support and help to leave. So I think exit programs are extremely important, and I know there are people here who work in that. And I know Sweden does this. I visited Sweden with a group from the Women's Rights Committee not so long ago, and we talked to NGOs who were working with women exiting prostitution. We also talked to the police in Sweden, who were very sympathetic. I mean, the British police actually, occasionally, they don't do it quite so much now, but they go around raiding brothels when police sort of charge in with batons and things, and it doesn't really achieve very much. But in Sweden, there was a completely different approach, which was to know the women on the streets and to really be helpful and give them support whatever support they might need. And that's the approach we need to be aiming for. So we need to, I think, start this from completely the other way round. It is about equality between women and men, but it's also about treating prostituted women and girls, most of whom will have been trafficked, in a humane and reasonable fashion, and enabling them to get out of the life that they never chose to have, and giving them that support. And I think that's one of the most important messages we must take away from here. If we want full equality between women and men, we have to provide that sympathy and that level of support. And I think it's some countries are doing it, some are getting near to do it, but we've got to make sure it's not only European, we've got to make sure that it's worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Mary Honeyball. We'll now give the floor to Swati Maliwal. It's a pleasure and honor to invite you to the stage as we are in Delhi and as you are the chief of the Delhi Commission on Women. You're also a member of the Aam Aadmi Party. And I've read that you've been trying hard and close the brothels of Delhi, but that you faced strong resistance. Please.
A very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you so much, Apne Aap, for inviting me here and giving me an opportunity to interact with such a distinguished panel and a very esteemed audience. I just want to begin with a little bit of a correction. I'm not the member of Aam Aadmi Party. I worked with Arvind Kejriwal and the team for 8 years while they were apolitical. And I am an apolitical person, and I'm right now the chairperson of the Delhi Commission for Women. Delhi is increasingly being called the rape capital. We are becoming a hub for trafficking. Every day there are 6 rapes that are happening, and several cases of trafficking, each one probably gorier than the previous one, is coming to our notice. 11-month girl was raped very recently in the capital. A 4-year-old baby was raped and murdered. The very next day, a 3.5-year-old baby was raped and there was an attempt to murder her. And almost every other day, we are coming across these extremely scary cases. And as the Delhi Commission of Women chief, I have a system wherein each and every rape which is reported is coming on my mobile phone. I'm being informed about it. And I can't tell you how difficult it is that after every 4 hours, I'm coming across one or the other incident which just shakes you. The Delhi Commission of Women, we tried to investigate as to why is it that we are becoming, what is wrong? Why is it that we are being called the rape capital? And I got very shocking statistics. We found out from the Delhi police, we sought information from the Delhi police, and they informed us that between 2012 to 2014, we had around 31,446 FIRs registered in crimes against women, and only 146 were convicted. So you can imagine, just look at the extent of low convictions. If there are no convictions, people are just not scared that if they do anything wrong, the law will get them and they will be punished. There is this huge amount of people feel very free in the capital. They feel that they can get away with anything, and it's extremely sad, but that is the fact that is happening. Trafficking, it's even more shocking because the number of cases that are so-called registered in trafficking under the trafficking laws, if you look at 2014, only 20 cases were registered in the state of Delhi. That's wrong. That's so wrong. Because the fact is that girls are being trafficked in and out of Delhi while we are speaking here, while we are having this conference. God only knows how many girls have come and how many girls have gone, because we are increasingly becoming a trafficking hub. Now, Delhi has a very, very weird structure. We have the Delhi police, which reports to the central government. We have a lot of things that report to the Delhi government. And because there are different parties, political parties, there's always this huge confusion. There's always this infighting. And presently, the situation is that the commission has been fighting for the past 1.5 years. There was not even a single group which actually met in Delhi and discussed the issue of women's safety and trafficking. So the commission for the past 1.5 years has been trying to get each and every stakeholder together, people who matter, people who have to take decisions, both the political level, at the bureaucratic level, to just sit together and listen to the voice of the commission, because we are experiencing around 500 women traveling to our office every day. We have 1,500 to 2,000 phone calls every day from women in Delhi. We understand what is the pain, and we want to communicate it to them so that some decisions can be taken. Now, finally, after 1.5 years, I've approached the Honorable High Court of Delhi, and finally we've got, a week back before this, we've got a judgment which has now established a special task force on women's safety in the capital, and we are going to be raising all these issues and much more there. Trafficking, I can't tell you, the moment I became the DCW chief, in the first 2-3 days, I went and visited the brothels of Delhi. And I did it because I think it is one of the most heinous crimes. It just rips away one's soul. That's what I personally feel. There are these brothels in Delhi. It's called the GB Road. We visited the GB Road, and we've been doing a lot of inspections in the nights, in the mornings. And each and every woman is being made to sleep with 30 men in a day. The kind of extent of atrocities is unimaginable. They are beaten up. There is all kind of sexual abuse. They don't even know how to report to the police because nobody wants to actually listen to them and nobody wants to acknowledge them. There are 5,000 odd women, 800 odd children, and there are 90 brothels. And the Delhi Commission of Women started investigating as to who owns these brothels. Because it's very interesting, the Indian law, according to the Indian law, the owners of the brothels should be behind the bars. But what actually happens is that whenever there is a police raid under whatever circumstances, the ones who are behind the bars are the same trafficked women who after 40-50 years have, risen a little bit in the ranks. So it's extreme. It was very crucial for the commission, and we were totally shocked because we talked to the Delhi police, we talked to the municipal corporation, we talked to the Delhi government, we talked to everyone, and we get to know that nobody knows as to who owns the brothels in Delhi. These brothels, they've been running since time immemorial, and we have started investigating it. Because of our pressure, very recently the Delhi police arrested one person who actually sold 5,000 women in the past 10 years from GB Road, in and out of GB Road, and made 100 crore rupees, 1 billion rupees out of it. And so when this was the first time in the in our near history that a person who is a middleman, who is a little bigger middleman, has got arrested. But such a system, such a huge network where every other day a girl is being trafficked, a minor girl is being rescued, cannot exist without active connivance of politicians, of police, of all the other authorities. And the Delhi Commission of Women, and presently, we are trying for two things. One, we want all these brothels, these structures, we want them removed. We want prostitution to end in Delhi. At the same time, we also want that each and every woman should be rehabilitated. And Delhi, it's very interesting that I was totally shocked when I got to know that Delhi does not have a rehabilitation policy even till date. Finally, we've also approached the court about it, and we are trying to right now lobby with the Delhi government to somehow get this rehabilitation policy, and we want to have these small projects that the Delhi Commission of Women wants to start, because I feel that it can be done. And I think, like Ruchira keeps saying all the time, that sex is not work. I very strongly believe in that. And every time a woman or anybody asks me that why is it that you're not advocating for legalization, I just have one question. When I can't do it, why do I expect other women to do it? So we will have the most educated, the most, people with a very good background, and they would come to me and they would ask me, why is it that you don't want prostitution to be legalized? And I have a question for them, that why is it that your daughter is a prostitute? Or why is it that I'm not a prostitute? I will not be a prostitute just because I have a particular background. But I want the poorest of the poor in India and in the world across to become prostitutes. So that is something that the Delhi Commission of Women is extremely against. We are going to fight tooth and nail against this horrible thing. Now, it's very interesting. The moment a girl is rescued, and we've rescued a lot of girls from GB Road and all across Delhi, we've set up a system. There's a helpline that we've set up, which is called 181. Anybody can call on that number, and we've got this huge network of 22 cars, 66 counselors, which are working round the clock. And if we get a call, we immediately send the girl, and the police also, we force the police to come along, and we are able to rescue girls. Whenever a girl is rescued, she's straight away sent to a shelter home in Delhi. And last year, we just decided, me and our commission member, Ms. Pramila Gupta, she's also here, we both decided that let us go and visit these shelter homes. Now, these are completely barred from media entry. Nobody can enter these shelter homes. We went at 8 p.m. in the night because I was very sure that if I'll go during the day, just the presence of the authorities will ensure that no women will tell me the truth. So we went at 8 p.m. in the night. We just barged inside the facility, and we were totally shocked to see what we saw. We saw that there were around 100 women, out of which 70 had turned mentally ill. They were screaming, they were shouting. It was a horrifying sight. And we had these 30 women, out of which some of them were from GB Road, who had recently been rescued, and they were sitting in one corner. And when we went there and when we started talking, they just hugged us, and they would just not let us go. And they told us that let me just send us back to GB Road, but don't put us here, because that facility is so horrifying. And you have the entire GB Road reverberating with horrifying stories of this facility. So what happens is that women, when they get caught or when they are even rescued, those women, they tell the police that nothing has happened to us, just for the fear that if they tell them the truth, they will be put in the Nari Niketan, which is actually a shelter for protection. It is not a jail. And trust me, it was worse than a jail. Like I said, 70 out of 100 had become mentally ill. I'm not sure that they became mentally ill due to their issues, or they became mentally ill just by the isolation of, and just further victimization of the victims. And many of them, because the next day we again went there, got all the files out, and we realized that many of them were locked up inside that place for 10 years. Then we got all this, when we've tried to set in a system when a woman comes and they are able to get out. We also created a report for the Honorable Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal ji, and he immediately suspended 5 officers. Situation is a little better, but the commission has to work a lot, and everybody has to actually work a lot to make life better for these women, because until what rehabilitation are we talking about if we can't even offer simple protection? Apart from that, we also have a huge network of placement agencies in the capital. They are operating. They are completely unregulated. They get these women from the poorest of the poor places and they tell them that we'll give you jobs, and then they are just pushed into the sex trade. Very recently, almost I think 15 or 20 days back, we had a horrifying case where this girl died because she was sold by 2 placement agencies to one particular employer, and that employer beat her left, right and center with iron rods. Her back was broken. I got a call on our helpline. I reached the hospital at 10 p.m. in the night. I was totally shocked to see her condition. Got her shifted to a good hospital. Got the police to act upon the case and got ensured that proper provisions are put in, and we also ensured the arrests. But at the same time, we were not able to save her. We issued a notice to the Labour Department, and we tried to find out how many placement agencies are operating in Delhi. They informed us that 1,500 agencies are operating, though our estimation is at least 15,000. But interestingly, out of those 1,500, they say that only 1 was licensed. So not even so it's a total, it's actually active connivance of a lot of people which the commission is trying to fight against. There's a lot of vested interest, and the proof of the vested interest is that I have been an activist for 10 years. Suddenly, out of the blue, I was given this government job which helps me to somehow become more powerful as an activist and just do my activism through this particular portfolio and ask questions, but nobody wants to answer questions. What they're right now doing is they've put in the entire vested interest has ganged up, and all that they're trying to do is just to shut down my voice and the voice of the commission. In the past 4 or 5 months, I've got 2 FIRs registered against me, 2 criminal cases. in one case, they say that I revealed the name of a rape victim. This girl who was raped, she was 14-year-old. She was raped for 12 days. She was not fed food. She was only given water. On the last day, she was fed acid. And for 2 months, the Delhi police did not inform us about this case when they are mandated by the court to do so. And they do so in generally all the cases. In this particular case, they did not inform us. From a newspaper report, I get to know that this girl is dying. She is in utter need of the commission. I send a team there. We get her transferred to a proper private hospital, one of the best in Delhi. I get the man arrested after a gap of 2 months, and the very next day the girl dies, very unfortunately. The very next day I get a FIR registered against me, which says that I have revealed the name of the victim when I did not. I did not reveal the name of the victim. Again, another FIR has been registered against me. They say that I have made illegal appointments. I can't understand what these illegal appointments are. There were 26 people in our commission when I entered. 26 people, 12,000 cases, 3.16 lakh calls on 181 helpline, 5,500 court cases, 1869 counseling sessions, and we are even working on Saturdays officially, which is the first in the country. So I can't understand what they're talking about, but 2 FIRs, 3 audits of the commission. We have a minuscule budget of 7 crores, of which also we've not been able to spend half of it because there are so many audits, all kinds of people, all central government, they're all coming and they're asking questions from our officers who are extremely scared. And for 4 months, the entire salaries of all our staff was stopped. The 181 helpline, the rape crisis cell, the anti-trafficking and rehabilitation cell, which is investigating into the ownership of GB Road, it was all stopped. Finally, the High Court intervened, and finally, we've got 50% of the salaries given to our staff, and we are trying. So the entire attack is there in order to silence us. That is because for the first time in the history of my country, we are having a women's commission which is active, which is asking questions. But like I said, nobody wants to answer these questions. The commission and me personally, we will continue to work, we will continue to ask questions, however difficult they might be, and we will... And like I have been telling the government and the Delhi police, I have been telling them again and again, even if I'm put down in the Tihar jail, it's absolutely okay. I'm an activist. I can go to jail. I will create a report of all the women living in jail, and I will come out and I will present a report to you. So I guess that's threat enough because it's been 6 months and I haven't been put in jail. But anyways, wherever we will go, we will do the work. Thank you so much once again. I think it's extremely important what Apne Aap has done today. It's so important that we all connect and we support each other. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Swati Maliwal ji. Thank you for your inspiring presentation. Thank you for your determination and for your daily, very brave action. And I think we all stand in solidarity with you when it comes to the pressure that you are facing as an activist, as you said. I would like now to give the floor to Malini Bhattacharya, who is a former member of parliament, but also the current chairperson of the All India Democratic Women's Association, and who is the honorary chair of this panel. Thank you so much for joining us, Malini.
Very hearty greetings to all of you. And thanks to Apne Aap, with whom I have had a very long and a very fruitful alliance, not just me, but my organization, All India Democratic Women's Association, which is the largest women's organization in the country. We have our units in most of the states, and these units work at the grassroots, and therefore, every day we are being faced with the phenomenon of trafficking leading to exploitation of people, women, for commercial sex. So it is an issue which is a burning issue with our organization. I would like to thank CAP International also for giving us this opportunity to be in touch with so many direct experiences of exploitation. And these extraordinary survivors who have been narrating their stories to us. Thank you all. If they tell us any one thing, it is the falsity of the premise that sexual exploitation for commercial gain leaves any space for choice. This premise stands on the notion that here we have a one-to-one transaction between the buyer and the seller, between two persons standing on an equal ground, whereas in reality, it involves a network, as other people also have said. It's a network with a hierarchy of village-level traffickers, pimps, rentiers, brothel owners, fly-by-night placement agencies, sellers of drinks and drugs, and local musclemen. All of them profit from this multi-billion-dollar business. And this is something that those who talk of decriminalizing the trade have to understand, that it's by no means a free transaction between two individuals, even apart from the point of body invasion, which has brought in again and again, and which is a very basic point. I think that this is something that we have to grasp, that the sex trade is one of the most lucrative worldwide businesses for exploitation of the vulnerable. Now, the individual narrations that we have heard, important as they are, at the same time has to show us some way towards social and political action. And I think that in this panel, all my eminent co-panelists have been trying to do this. Now, in the last 2 decades, I'd like to point out something in this regard. In the last 2 decades, since I was an elected member of Parliament myself, for 2 decades I have not seen the inside of the Parliament. But since that time, a lot of change has taken place in the political scenario. With the shadow of money and muscle power that Fatma has been talking about when she talked of her own experience in the elections, this shadow is hanging heavier over the lawmaking and administrative process. I'm not saying that this has happened in my country alone. I think it has happened in many, many countries, not just developing countries, but in developed countries as well. And it has taken place, I would say very openly, it is something that has taken place under the so-called neoliberal regime, which we are finding in operation all over the world. Now, what has happened as a result is that the last girl is not a static category, but those who had been less vulnerable earlier are now being pushed beyond the margins of vulnerability anew. You see, the last girl is not the same person. An agricultural worker's daughter, a small peasant's daughter, who would have been who would have had a little more security a couple of decades earlier as a result of acute agricultural distress is now being pushed into that position of vulnerability. So, the last girl is a category that we have to understand in this context. And they are being pushed into vulnerability through the growing loss of employment, the growing need to find livelihood in hazardous, insecure circumstances without the minimum human dignity, and also the growing withdrawal of welfare services, which are regarded as today as a social drain, even by the government. Today, in our country, the work participation of women is falling. Does it mean that our women have become more idle, that they don't want to work anymore? Certainly not. You see, their work is being pushed into the region of invisibility. They're working for no wages. They're working for family wages, so-called family wages, or for very, very meager wages. They're being pushed into the most insecure areas of livelihood. And this is something that is not just happening in my country, but I think this has been happening in many other countries, including the European countries. It has been happening in the United States of America. I'm told that even the welfare model in the Nordic countries that we praise so much has been under severe strain in the recent years. Now, we have the national budget coming up tomorrow. And of one thing we can be sure, that taxes on not just the very rich, of course, they are there, but the taxes on the well-to-do will be reduced. And as a result of that, all the existing measures for job creation, for nutrition, for rehabilitation, for poverty eradication are going to be further cut down. I was listening to this very powerful speech of Swati Maliwal, and she was talking of the condition of shelter homes. Those of us who have worked in this area, we know what the condition of shelter homes is. Now, since 2013, I think, there has been a huge fund called the Nirbhaya Fund, lying with the government. Since the rape and killing of Nirbhaya, a fund was instituted by the government. And many of us had given the proposal that with that money, proper shelter homes for vulnerable girls should be set up in the district level. That money still remains unspent. And apparently, I don't know, but according to newspaper reports, the minister of the department has said that it's because we don't have any good schemes to spend the money on. So, you see, at the same time, there's another thing. We have been talking of the refugees who come from the conflict zones and the way in which they are exploited by traffickers. But there are also people from the ranks of those who are rendered rootless and forced to migrate as a result of agricultural distress, to make way for so-called developmental plans, or as victims of environmental change. Those who are in tune with the recent policies of the government, the policy that the governments have been following in the last 2 decades, they would like to say that migration is a very good thing, because this means that women are getting opportunities for employment elsewhere. But you see, the point is, we do not know where migration ends in such cases and where trafficking begins. We have to make that distinction, but we can't make that distinction if the present policies are in place. And I think that it is in this setting that we have to think of laws, protocols, or administrative plans. So I come to my final point about the law, the status of law in our country, what is happening in that arena. And we felicitated Justice Sinha this morning. And, if there were more judgments like the one which he pronounced, it would really become a weapon in our hands. Now, we do have an anti-trafficking law, as other people have also said, since 1956, which regards brothel-based prostitution as the sole destination of the trafficked girl. There is no definition of the word trafficking. And there is no space for other kinds of trafficking, for instance, for forced labor, child labor. This law also fails to distinguish in its implementation between perpetrators and victims to a certain extent, which is why you find that the rescued girls are taken to the jail, which is quite against the law. But still it is done because, you see, the girls are regarded as bad girls, and therefore society has to be protected from them, and therefore they have to be taken to the correctional homes to be corrected, or to the shelter homes where you have heard what the situation is in the shelter homes. And as a result of that, and the other thing is that this law fails to put in place any kind of what all of you have called an exit policy. That if there is a genuine choice for that girl, then there must be a choice for exit. But there is no way in which she can exit. So without an exit policy, a law remains incomplete. It does not depend on the law altogether. It also depends on schemes that you put in place, but it is the law which tells you that these schemes have to be put in place. So, at the moment, there is a bill on the anvil, of which there have been 12 versions, because Apne Aap, our organization, and many other organizations have been intervening into it. The last version of this so-called comprehensive new anti-trafficking bill, we have not been able to see because it's not in the public domain. Now, we don't know what is going to happen, but there has been, since 2013, a certain change in the Indian Penal Code. It was possible to have an amended Article 370, which defines trafficking more or less in line with the 2000 protocol. But there was one small but significant change. The word prostitution was dropped, and we were left with the more generalized, rather abstract category of various forms of sexual exploitation. That word prostitution was dropped. That is what I am saying is rather significant. See, this is because we are not sticklers for... Thank you. We are not sticklers for nomenclature. But here, there is an attempt to change the content also. It shows signs of powerful lobbies seeking to delink trafficking from prostitution altogether. If an adult joins the sex trade, maybe it is a matter of choice, that's what they say, and therefore this choice has to be decriminalized by being kept out of a law against the crime of trafficking. But as amply demonstrated, sex trade leaves no question of choice for the woman drawn into it. And to decriminalize the trade would be to decriminalize those who have been making huge profits out of the unending miseries of women and girls. So those who are pitching for decriminalizing the trade are not only overlooking this fact, but also condoning the overall policies for the creation of unemployment, withdrawal of social services, and evictions from home and livelihoods, which forces women to sell sexual services. Very recently, there was this horrific Child Labor Amendment Act. The child labor was amended so that children could be inducted in an unregulated manner into the so-called entertainment industry, raising the opportunity for them to be trafficked. So this is the situation, and we need a law, therefore, with a proper exit policy, with social security, with plans for reintegration into the community, and effective punishment for bigger as well as smaller perpetrators. And to do this, the policies which hinder this have also to be resisted. We shall seek directions from the eminent panelists in these matters. Thank you. I think I have taken more than my time.
Thank you very much to Malani Bhattacharya. It's great to have allies such as IDWA, such as NCDHR, and I have to say that we're running so late and we've been running during all this Congress, but we very much look forward to engaging further with you after this Congress. I was saying that we're running late. Actually, the next session has started 45 minutes ago. So I'll give right now the floor to Meenakshi Natarajan, who is a former member of parliament. I think she was one of the youngest member of parliament at that time. And, sorry? One of the youngest. And with the General Secretary of the All India Congress Committee. Thank you very much for joining us.
Distinguished panelists and distinguished delegates, I would first like to thank the Apne Aap Worldwide and CAP for giving me this opportunity to be part of this conference to end the worst form of exploitation against women. I have myself been very deeply influenced by the Gandhian path of non-violent struggle for the upliftment of the last man and the last woman. I truly believe that Satya or truth is the basis for justice and is most fundamental and is the core to the human existence. And a seeker of truth can have karuna and only karuna or compassion as his or her tool for this struggle. Hence, ahimsa, non-violence, would be his or her only weapon, and satyagraha, the movement through which we put forth this struggle. He or she would use satyagraha for the upliftment of the last woman, last girl, last man, which would be, of course, called Antyodaya, as Ruchira rightly pointed out. And I believe that until we realize Antyodaya, that is the upliftment of the last man, woman, and child, Sarvodaya, that is justice and upliftment of all, is not possible. I have come here to know, after knowing that Apne Aap truly believes in ahimsa and put in their own words, resisting violence to the self and to the other, and in Antyodaya, that is upliftment of the last and most marginalized woman. Now, there is a great need to separate trafficking from so-called sex work. We condemn human trafficking in all of its forms, including sexual exploitation, and demand that it should be criminalized as a matter of international law. Research across the world has shown that not all women pushed into this exploitation are trafficked. Many enter this due to compulsion. Some people say that many enter this by choice. I want to correct and say they don't enter this by choice, but they actually enter this because of lack of choice of dignified source of earning livelihood. In certain parts of India, in the name of tradition, in the name of cultural practice, women of certain communities are forced into this. I come from Mandsaur, Madhya Pradesh. I represented that in the last parliament in the People's House. And I have personally witnessed that women of the most marginalized groups, called as the Bachra community, are forced into this. Their work is criminalized, morally they are ostracized, and are deprived of any sort of social and legal security. Their children face discrimination, violence, and abuse. I have had personal experience of witnessing discrimination against these women. Some of them strive continuously to get themselves out of this trap and earn living in a dignified manner. But they are rejected, abused, and all the doors and windows are shut for them, and they are not able to get out of this. I would like to share here my anguish on this type of an exploitation. We in India are still, Amarjit ji is not here, but are still not free from the bondage of feudal and patriarchal mindset. Tribal women in Bijapur, Chhattisgarh get molested, gang raped, are paraded naked by the armed forces. Kind of force used to send a message that if you dare to challenge the establishment, your women folk would get this. A judge in a lower court simply comments that how can a tribal woman be ever molested or assaulted, as if to say that a tribal woman has no dignity, that she is actually supposed to be available. There are instances when if a girl gets molested in the night, we come across statements saying that the girl should not be going out in the night, that she was inviting trouble for herself. Why was she dressed in such and such way? Why didn't she call the rapist bhaiya, brother? And that would have sort of helped soften the rapist towards her. This is the environment we are living in. Recently, I met a group of students from Haryana Central University. They were enacting a play written by Mahashweta Devi, none other than Mahashweta Devi, on Draupadi. The play which is set in the background of exploitation of a tribal woman by the armed forces. And the students, believe me or not, faced sedition charges. And then I don't want to go into much detail, but I would like to hear in this audience mention, Nafiza was mentioning about a minority of right-wing religious groups in her country. What is happening is in my country is even more shocking, because we have a huge legacy of democratic institutions. But Banaras, and I don't want to say whose parliament constituency that is, but in Banaras, in the Banaras Hindu University, girl students cannot eat non-veg. Girl students cannot use 24/7 library. Girl students are not allowed to use mobile phones, which would make them impure. Patit, that is the word. And all these religious right-wing people, maybe a minority, glorify women as Lakshmi, Saraswati, Parvati, supposed to be the goddess of wealth, of knowledge, of empowerment, according to the Hindu mythology. but very sorry to say and add that usually women are deprived of all the three: education, empowerment, choice, and also, of course, knowledge. I would here also like to reiterate that wherever violation happens, especially to women in brothels, they are not just exposed to violations of basic human rights, but the kind of arbitrary arrest, detention they face, extortion and harassment by the police and civic authorities. They are usually excluded from all kind of rights, basic civil rights. And I would like to repeat what my earlier speaker, Madam Malini ji here mentioned, that we have to decriminalize the exploited woman, but have to criminalize the act, the people involved in it, and sort of find an exit policy for these women to get out of this. In India in 2007, the Ministry of Women and Child Development reported the presence of over 3 million female sexually exploited workers, so-called workers, with 35.47 below the age of 18. And surveys everywhere show that there are estimated 12 million children pushed into this. I believe and would like to say that every human being has the right to live a dignified life. The framers of our Constitution were aware of the importance of human dignity, and hence the word human dignity got incorporated in our preamble. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights provides for protection and development of right to life with utmost human dignity. Women have been victims of various forms of cultural and customary exploitations, and dignity refers to honor and self-esteem of every individual. The idea of human dignity is therefore against exploitation and protection of one's own self-dignity. Forcing a woman to enter this trade is the most ghastly, inhuman violence against her. It attacks her self-esteem. She needs protection. She needs rehabilitation. She has every right to lead an honorable life in the society. It is often seen and felt in India that the 1986 Act, which is supposed to protect the woman and supposed to completely ban trafficking, has in one or the other way become tool for further exploitation. There have been instances where women who have been rescued come out of it and say that they were compelled into this by the police forces, and when they refused, they were put behind the bars. Not the brothel owners, but the victims were put behind the bars. This cannot go on. I feel some of my other speakers here mentioned that there have been arguments that this should be legalized. And my question to people arguing on this has always been, well, if this has to be legalized, then would this become a career option for yourself, for your children, for your daughter, for your son? And when it cannot be a viable career option, can we ever think of legalizing bonded labor? Can we ever think of legalizing slavery? And if we argue that prostitution be made legal, I would like to say that it is actually like asking a rapist to marry the rape victim. It is like giving a legal sanctity to commercial exploitation, commercial rape, which is what actually prostitution leads to. So in this background, I firmly believe that women face utmost indignity, and this is never by choice. This is always because of lack of choice. So we have to come together. I lead the Panchayat organization of the Indian National Congress. I feel that the grassroots level democratically elected bodies at the villages can be powerful medium through which we can not just keep a record of trafficked children, but also make them a powerful medium of advocacy, of education, of helping women exit out of this. And this can be done through dignity, through establishing dignity, through ahimsa, and of course through karuna. And for the woman, as a expressing my solidarity, I would end my words by saying this, that I am not a big banyan tree. I am a lush green bush. The more you cut, the more I grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this powerful presentation. I think it gives us a lot of hope to listen to the very powerful leaders of India who are ready to tackle the challenge. We will now give the floor to our final speaker. Just before that, I have to acknowledge the presence on the stage of Nozizwe Madlala Rutledge, who has been for 15 years a member of parliament in South Africa, former Minister of Defense, former Minister of Health, a great abolitionist activist, a founder and chair of Embrace Dignity. And we invited you to sign the petition a bit earlier. She will not take the floor again this time because she proposed very kindly that we run to the next session. So thank you so much for Nozizwe. I'd like to applaud you for your past and upcoming work. So I will now give the floor to the last speaker. He is not a member of parliament. He is not even a former member of parliament. He is just an ambassador at large on trafficking in human beings. Per Anders Sunesson, the ambassador of Sweden for combating trafficking in persons. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I bet you all are thinking, what is this Swedish man going to talk about, right? Well, I hardly know myself because time is running so late, so I've been slashing my speech like this. But I was going to start with thanking the organizers for making this conference, but I'm not going to do that. And I was also going to thank all the survivors for giving their testimonies, but I will not do that either. And I was also going to thank all the great speakers here today and yesterday and the day before that. I think this is one of the absolutely best conferences I've been to. Fantastic speakers. Really, really, yes. So instead of doing all that, I'm going to thank you guys for staying here so late with me. No, actually, the topic for I'm not going to surprise you, the topic for my presentation will be the Swedish approach to first human trafficking and then prostitution. But I will try to cut it as short as possible because a lot of things have already been said, or most things. So Sweden is a country of destination for trafficked persons, mainly for forced labor, begging, and to some extent household work. The numbers are very small, but human trafficking exists, and we also have trafficking for sexual exploitation, which is something I will talk more about when I discuss prostitution. Most of the trafficked persons in Sweden, they are from Romania, Bulgaria, and we also have girls and women being trafficked from Nigeria. Yes. Sweden has ratified all the global instruments that regulate trafficking, including the Palermo Protocol, and we have transformed them into our own legislation. We have also ratified the ILO Convention on Forced Labor. And we have also ratified two, I think, very important regional legal frameworks regarding trafficking. And that is the European Directive on Trafficking and the semi-European instrument, the Council of Europe's Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings. These two last mentioned instruments are, in my view, important because they have mechanisms that the Palermo Protocol doesn't have. Mechanisms that I feel are very important for the progress of combating human trafficking. The European Directive of Trafficking is very similar to the Palermo Protocol with one exception. And Mary, you touched upon this before. It stipulates that all 28 member states in the European Union must assign one national rapporteur, and that there must be one European coordinator for all these rapporteurs. And her name was already mentioned, Miria Vassiliadou, and she's doing a great job. This coordination with all member states is functioning really well, I would say, and we are cooperating with each other and sharing best practices. The Council of Europe's convention has another mechanism that I wish that the Palermo Protocol had, and that is the group of experts called GRETA. It's a group, it's a board that exists of 13 persons from different countries, and they are a review mechanism. They travel to the member states and review how each country are implementing the convention on trafficking in human beings. And they interview not only politicians or bureaucrats or civil servants like myself, but also all the NGOs in the country, that are working with these issues. And then they will write the report. And this can, of course, sometimes be tough for the politicians, but it's to answer to, but it really pushes things forward. Well, compared to India and many other countries, Sweden is tiny, tiny, tiny. We just turned 10 million people last week. Big celebration in Sweden. Yes, but still, we do have 290 municipalities. We have 21 regions. The police is national. Social welfare is the responsibility of the municipalities, and healthcare is the responsibility of the regions. And most time when you detect a victim, you know, all these agencies need to be involved. And I'm not sure how the cooperation works between your agencies in your countries, but I can tell that in Sweden we have had a hard time to achieve smooth cooperation between agencies. And because of that, a few years ago, the government decided to give one of the country regions the mandate and task to be a national coordinator within Sweden for combating trafficking and prostitution. And it's the national coordinator's task to facilitate a platform for all the relevant authorities and also for the NGOs, and to coordinate actions between them. And another task is, together with the organizations, to produce manuals, for example, for how to detect victims of human trafficking, and also to do awareness campaigns together. And let me tell you that this has been very successful. And I do think we have a well-functioning machinery right now. But this is super important. There is a direct correlation between resources and success rate on discovering victims in human trafficking. Put in more resources and you will find more victims. Yes. Finally, regarding human trafficking, 3 other entities that I don't have the time to talk about now, but that are super important also: Migration Authority, labor unions, and also the private business sector, to involve them in the fight against human trafficking. Ladies and gentlemen, when I talk to people sometimes who are not familiar with human trafficking, they often tell me, well, it depends on the poverty in the world, it depends on corruption, it depends on there's so much organized crime. And I said, well, we can discuss that. But my truth is that human trafficking only exists, solely exists, because there is a demand. There is a demand for cheap labor, demand for organs, demand for women and girls to sexually exploit. And if this demand didn't exist, there would be no market for human traffickers. And my view is that all countries have a huge responsibility to do everything in their power to stop the demand in their country for people to be exploited, for cheap labor and for the sex industry, including prostitution. And you know, we all know this. There are several legal instruments that support this. There are human rights declarations, Agenda 2030 that will support this. And I'm now at the point in my presentation where I will start talking about the Swedish approach to prostitution. But before I do that, I feel a strong urge to just share a conversation I had with a minister in Cambodia when I was there a few months ago. We're talking about the American TIP report. You probably know about it. This is the report they do every year where they kind of investigate what countries are doing when it comes to, you know, rule of law and to find and prosecute those who are traffickers. And I mean, this is important, but she said to me, hey, Anders, you know, the way this report is focused and constructed, it's always us, the undeveloped countries, who ends up on top of the watch list. Wouldn't it be great if there was a similar report that would solely be focusing on what are the rich countries doing to reduce demand? And I think this is a brilliant idea. There are countries that are, you know, building their economies on using cheap labor. There are, and we touched upon this before, countries that actually allows prostitution and bordellos, and like mentioned before, there is a great pull effect to these countries from low-income countries. So I think this would be something very important. So let's talk about the Swedish approach to prostitution. Anyone know what law we have in Sweden? Yes. I know that most of you, or probably at this time of the day, all of you know that it's criminalized to buy sex but not selling, and that the one who is selling his or her body will not be punished. They will instead be offered help to leave prostitution, and that's medical help, social help, and financial help. And this law, like I said, we had it since almost 17 or more than 17 years. This was a part of many different actions taken to combat men's violence against women. The law has a strong gender equality base, and the legal argument for the law back then was that men buying sex from women is an expression of gender inequality, and I think that's still is a strong argument. And when we were doing this law piece, connections were made between prostitution and men's violence against women, and it was also stated that clear evidence between prostitution and having been sexually abused in the childhood. And this law has really met the expectations of those in favor of the law. The street prostitution was reduced to half, and an evaluation a few years back shows that the law also changed the mindset of most Swedes. There are very, very few people in Sweden that thinks it's okay to buy sex. Yes. And we have touched upon this several times today, but it's in my paper, so I will say it anyway. I sometimes get the question why it's so important to not punish the one who is selling, and we talked about it. There are several answers to it. One is the gender inequality argument. Another one is that we know that most don't want to be in prostitution. They are there because they are being forced into this, and they find no other way to earn money. And to punish them would be to victimize them one more time. And also, if we criminalize those who are selling their bodies, they will be afraid to talk to authorities and to social workers, healthcare personnel. Will have a hard time establishing contact with them. I was actually out working with the police in Stockholm with who are doing the prostitution group, and someone mentioned the police, I think it was you, Mary, in Sweden, that they have doing good with this, and I totally agree. And that's what the police say. They are not really afraid of the police at all, and the law actually protects those who still are in prostitution, because if I would go out and buy sex in Sweden, I would be so super scared of being caught, right? I would not make a fuss with the person I was buying sex from. I would be very, very, very quiet. And I would know that if I do anything, she can call the police, and, I'm the one who's going to go to jail, I'm the one who's going to have a fine, I'm the one who's going to lose my face in my job. So, yeah. So, one more thing that we talked about. My government is also deeply concerned about the movement, or that there are people arguing that selling sex should be seen upon a job, just like any other job. Some of these people, and I think this is why I was appointed in May last year, because my government felt the strong need to have a voice speaking about the Swedish system, because there's a lot of people, I don't know, but there are people out there actually telling lies about the Swedish system. They say that the system has failed, that violence against those in prostitution has increased, and that the prostitution has gone underground. Well, let me tell you, these are all false propaganda, and I could back it up with research, but I don't have the time to do it now, but I would be happy to serve you that if you need. And just one short example. We have not had one violent crime against a person in prostitution since the law was enacted in Sweden. Important factors for success has been, of course, like I said, putting resources into the system, super important. Educating police officers, judges, prosecutors, migration officers, and also to have a gender equality, education throughout the school system. You need to work on all levels with this issue. And also, which has been mentioned, of course, exit programs. Finally, and this has been said many times, the connection between human trafficking and prostitution. Sweden is not a good market for traffickers. We don't see that we have any organized traffickers in Sweden. And we know that in a neighboring country where this is allowed, where there are brothels and more than 400,000 prostitutes, we know that there are traffickers organized there. It's easier to be that in a country to that. Okay, I was going to go through all the good arguments for not allowing prostitution, but I'm not going to do that because of lack of time, because we all discussed it already. So I'm just going to summarize. My hope and my government's hope is that more countries will consider criminalization of buying sex as a good instrument to combat trafficking and to stop sexual exploitation of women, to enhance human rights and gender equality, and to achieve the goals in Agenda 2030. It's all, as a matter of fact, it's also a question about what society we want our children to grow up in, isn't it? What values we want to pass on to our children. So my last remark will be more of a thought, why is buying sex being allowed? Why is there a movement in the world to decriminalize? Who is profiting from allowing prostitution and buying sex, pimping, having brothels? Is it the young girl from Romania who are working in an apartment in Stockholm in my country? Or is it the girl from Nigeria walking the streets of Europe? No, I don't think so. Thank you so much for staying.